everyone, and welcome back to another episode of our amazing podcast, Becoming the Light from the Shadows of Abuse. And I have another beautiful woman guest with me tonight, name of Sharlene Lynch. Now, as always, I am not going to do a lengthy introduction. I'm going to let Sharlene talk to you about herself. She knows herself much better than I do. So just let me say that Sharlene is a speaker. She's a thought leader on MINDSHIFT, which is the future of mindset. And I'm so happy to be talking about this because, as you all know, working with hypnotherapy, mind shift is very, very important to me. So I can't wait to hear what Sharlene has to say about all of this. And I'm going to hand straight over to her so she can introduce herself to you, tell you all what she does, and then we'll work our way through her journey and see how she got to where she is today. So hi, Sharlene. Thank you so much for being here.
Oh, thank you so much, Sarah. I'm very excited to be in this space and I feel home. So thank you so much for having me here. We run a charity here in South Australia called Healing Through Love, which creates a safe place to land for families of domestic and family violence. And that looks like Pamper Days that we run once a year. And we also run them in Tasmania as well. And we offer educational services around that space. And it's just lovely. I feel like I've got a sister, a soul sister in you already. And we've only just met and just started talking. So thank you for having me in this space.
Oh, thank you. And thank you so much for what you do. I think that the impact of domestic violence is so underestimated. You know, people who think that, oh, once you're out of it, oh, you're okay now, just get over it, just leave. All of these things that diminish, it's just. And it totally diminishes what the experience is, and what the lasting impact is. So yeah, thank you so much for what you do. And now I know that what you do comes from some of your own experience, and that you have an incredible story. I know when people go through trauma and abuse in their lives, it's very, very easy for people to get stuck, especially in our current medical system. They get stuck with, I can't heal, I will always be this way, I can't get over this. And really, my podcast is here for beautiful people like you to just be very open and honest as you are, to show people what you went through, what you've come through, and where you are now. And it's really about just, we're here to show the way. You know, you're here to lead people from whatever they've been through onto a path of healing and growth, and just to a whole and complete life. So just tell us, take us back and tell us what you've been through and where all this began for you.
So I'd probably like to start with Mind Shift, which
Yes.
is more of a story around less about domestic violence, more of a story of tragedy, personal tragedy, and then maybe we'll wander backwards in time to sort of tell that story, if that's okay.
Whatever works. Yeah, whatever's important. Yeah, I can't wait to hear about the mind shift.
And I'm
So
sure that we all know that there's triggers all the way through all of these conversations, ladies. So I'm sure we all know how to, we've got that there. So in September 2011, I came home from a birthday party and I wanted to let my son know that I was home early and that I was relatively sober, which was unusual for me. And I knocked on his door and he didn't answer the door, which was very unusual because normally he liked to at least tell me, yep, I hear you, mum. So I tried to wiggle his door to try and sort of get his attention, and the door was locked, which is very unusual because we just didn't lock the doors in the house. So I asked my partner to go around the outside of the house and look through the bedroom window to let Scott know that I was home, and because he was probably gaming and wearing those headsets that 17-year-olds
as they do.
as they do, and I was screaming, I'm home, but true mother style, and that's when we discovered that my 17-year-old baby boy had hung himself. I raced to Scott's door and I kicked the door down and I tried for 15 long minutes to try and resuscitate him, all while praying that I would be able to bring him back to life. The ambulance officers came in with their hands like fully laden with equipment and they ushered me out of the room. And I stood outside Scott's door and still praying for another outcome, that they would be able to revive him when I wasn't able to. The ambulance officer came out of the door and he looked at me, and I know he said something, but I couldn't actually hear him. The look on his face was enough. I knew that they'd been unsuccessful. And all I remember is crashing to the ground and grasping the ballast rail on the way down to sort of stop myself hitting the ground. And I was still praying. I was still praying for another outcome. And that's when I heard it. That's when I heard the one word. And that one word was forgive. It was loud. It was audible. I really thought everyone around me had heard the word. When I was able to stand up, the ambulance officer asked, "Do you want to come inside and say goodbye?" And yeah, I did. I came back inside to Scott's room and I laid down on the ground. And, Scott was 17 years old, 1 week off his 18th birthday. He was 6'3". He was a really big boy. And he was a state rugby player, so really solid. And I lied down on the ground and I rested my head on his chest. And I said, "Mummy loves you, baby. And I forgive you for your choice." And what I didn't understand is that me forgiving Scott for his choice began my healing process. So that allowed me to be in a completely different space than the people around me. And just that one thing, being on the other side of forgiveness for his choice. Later on that night, I was sitting on my lounge chair with my feet shoved in underneath me, sort of almost in a fetal position. And I was staring at my giant cup of coffee that was sitting on the coffee table. And I said out loud, now I thought I was saying to myself, but I said it to everyone that was in the room. So that was all the police officers and all the family that had gathered by this stage. I said out really loud, "I'm not just going to survive this. I'm going to thrive through this." That's what Scott would want. And it must have taken the police by surprise because they wrote it in the report and they later on questioned me as a person of interest on that one statement.
I, do you know, I was just thinking that must have caused quite a stir for you to say that at the time. Like, I can understand, because of the space that I work and operate in, I can see why in that moment that was the best thing for you, and how impactful and powerful that would have been for you, but how shocking it would have been to everyone else.
Absolute understatement. There was an adverse reaction and I got pulled into the CIB and questioned over it. Like, it was like, that is not what someone says in that situation. But for me,
Yeah.
I was speaking out loud. And for me, it was the next step in the process, which was making a firm, never going back decision that I was going to live a different life. And part of my healing process. And so, what does it look like to make a decision like that on the night that your son commits suicide? So that the next day, I grabbed a spiral bound book and I just started writing out everything that I was grateful for. As I understood that gratitude was powerful. I didn't have an understanding how powerful gratitude is until I went through the process. So I started the process of healing with forgiveness, continued with making a firm decision, and then lifted my frequency with gratitude. And I just wrote down for pages everything I was grateful for. And that began now it's a daily process for me. And I start the day with gratitude, end the day with gratitude, and I do gratitude throughout the day. So I remember one day, really not long after Scott passed away, before the funeral, the only thing that was written on my gratitude list was that the sun was shining. That one day was really, really a hard day. But even still, I still managed to find one thing. So regardless of what happens, I'll always make sure that I do gratitude, because it does. Look, science has shown us
Oh,
that gratitude, you pray over food, they now can scientifically show you molecularly it changes the frequency of the food. When you it works on every level. So, they can test you, they can put magnets on your head and they can see what's happening. So, gratitude is an essential part of my healing. And I teach this to my clients all the time. Let's just find a way for you to do gratitude that works with you and how your life works. So not everyone's going to do gratitude the same way. I'm a firm believer of a gratitude journal. I love that. I think it's a fantastic thing. And I say prayers. So pray for my food and I pray for people. And yeah, begin and end the day with grace and prayer, and just gratitude makes a huge difference.
Oh, it's certainly, I mean, yeah, and that's not, I mean, that used to be quite woo-woo, but now it's scientific that a positive focus, whether you call it gratitude, a positive focus, so maybe something more gratitude. Okay, so let's just say a positive focus, a positive outlook. And you're absolutely correct. Science has shown us that it changes everything about you. It changes the cells within you, the signals they give your body, your immune system, the genes that get activated. Absolutely. This is all science. This is not made up. This is not pulled from the air.
I know.
This is what we know. And why we do not use this in our mainstream medical approach to healing people, I don't know.
Well, we're getting there and we're changing things in that space. And when there's enough
Yes,
light
we need
workers
to.
in that space, we won't need traditional healers anymore. And that's maybe why they're
Absolutely.
hanging on so desperately.
I, that I'm so glad you said that. There are becoming more and more of us. There's more and more understanding, and yeah, we need. There is no reason for people to be suffering. No need for people to have years of therapy that's ineffective when they could just be taught how to collaborate with their own mind and body and to create their own healing. Yeah, thank
Absolutely.
you.
And that
And
is a great segue to the next section
oh,
that
good.
happened after gratitude, is that I decided now, making that decision that I was going to thrive through this and live an abundant life, is that by shifting my frequency with gratitude, now within the first week after Scott passed away, I started to craft a list of what I would like my life to look like. And this was, uh, to say this was far-fetched, it was an understatement. To say it was science fiction would be an understatement. I crafted and designed a life that I'm now currently living, that from where I was sitting within that week, it was physically impossible.
So what were the differences? Tell us, because obviously this is something that we teach people to do. We teach them to visualize the life that they want, and normally for people the gap is huge. So
Mm.
for you, what was the gap? What was the
Well,
difference?
okay, so now 9 years down the track after my son's choice to commit suicide, the let's start with 30 years. So for 30 years, I had a 30-year-long addiction to alcohol. So I'm
Oh,
now been sober as of, what's today, the 3rd of August. I've now been sober 5 years and 3 days. So
okay.
that's substantial. I shifted and chose to live a healthy life, and I've been a vegetarian now and lost 25 kilos. So shifted in that space as well. I shifted and chose to. I was suffering from a crippling mental illness of hoarding, and I had 33 cubic meters of stuff. So that's fairly dramatic amount, and that's a lot of stuff to.
And this is what people don't realize. This is very interesting because you're talking about here about having an addiction to alcohol, but your other addiction, hoarding. So hoarding is an addiction, and this is what people don't realize. And the thing is that all addiction comes from the void within you from unmet childhood needs. It creates this void within you that you try and fill with things outside of yourself. And then, as you discovered, it doesn't work. And you get to the point where you have to let those things go and focus on healing yourself and not needing the things outside of you. So,
Absolutely. I
yeah.
also had a crippling mental disorder of OCD to the point of self-harm, which was not
Same
being
thing.
managed. And at the worst of my challenges, I was unable to leave the house because of the OCD and the self-harm, and also ADD and a range of other mentally challenged situations, including very damaged immune system and lots of other health concerns as well. So I was a very sick person most of the time. So
All
coming from
related to this.
all related to
All
this.
related to, and this is what I'm telling people all the time, that all of these physical, the impaired immune system, all of those things are related to your damaged emotional and mental health. And when you heal yourself mentally and emotionally, your physical healing follows, because you move your body and your mind into this positive state that we were talking about earlier.
Yes,
It's
exactly.
exactly how it works.
Exactly. So I went through that shift process, and starting with the forgiveness, making that decision, and then lifting the frequency with gratitude, and then now down the track, being able to unpack the process I went through, which is the mind shift process, and that's basically what I do as a business coach now, and an advocate, obviously in the DV space, helping girls through the shift process as well. So yeah, so that's where I was, and this is where I am now. I'm international speaker, and yeah, I'd like to consider myself an inspirational speaker as well, and my audience seem to agree. So yeah,
Well, you're obviously like leagues away from where you were. I mean, you said yourself, you put down the life that you wanted. It seemed impossible, but it wasn't. You've bridged that gap. You've gone from where you were to where you are now, clearly. So, but tell us something about this mind shift,
Mm,
this methodology that you work with, this process.
yeah. So it's an acronym. So shift. So the first letter is S, and this is to see the big picture. And you need time to craft this. It needs to be extraordinary. You owe this to yourself to take the time, effort, and energy to craft a future. And if it feels comfortable, it's not big enough. It needs to be the point where it's almost unbelievable, and you need to dare to dream. And this is a challenge I find for most of my clients, and even in business, whether it's business or personal, is to craft the dream. And so we go through a process of asking questions so that we can get into the unconscious and subconscious and just pull everything out and really get to the bottom of it, what they really want, so that they're living a life on purpose and that all of their needs are met and their family's needs as well. So taking that time to craft it is really important. We've got some people that go away for an entire weekend to craft this vision of what their life could look like, and it needs to be extraordinary. So that's S. So that's see the big picture. And then the next letter is H. H is honing in on reality. This is where we get real. What's really happening? And this is where we get the nuts and bolts out. So from the business perspective, we get all the spreadsheets out. We have a look at what is really happening. We find out from a financial perspective, find out from an emotional, spiritual perspective, what's happening in this space. And this gives us an opportunity to see the gap between where you are and where you want to be. And that's where we start to map out what we can do to move forward. So that's H, hone in on reality. The next one, and probably the most important letter I find, is I, and that is implement quick wins. So we find very, very quick wins. So my very first quick win for me was not drinking coffee. So that night, as I was looking at my giant cup of coffee, I didn't drink that coffee, and I haven't drank coffee since. And what that did
Right.
for me is it allowed that serotonin kick, and it helped me rewire my brain to show, look at this. This is something you never thought you could do, because I was an 8 cup a day girl, and you gave up coffee. If you can give up coffee, what else can you do? So we use those, implement the quick wins to maybe make a quick financial gain if you're looking at a business. And if it's on a personal level, what can we do as far as your habits to create maybe a sticky habit or something that can help you move forward so that you can convince yourself that more change is possible? So I love I, implement quick wins. And then we have F. F is focus on the patterns. So the things that have been happening for you and to you, for you, let's say they're for you, have been happening all of your life. And this is an opportunity to really dig deep on those patterns. Is this a pattern that's happened all of your lifetime? Is it a pattern that's happened in your family's lifetime? Is it a hereditary pattern? And if you believe in past lives, maybe it's a past life pattern. So we really get down to the bottom of patterns and how these show up and what they look like and what we can do to move forward and how we can break these patterns. And we use tools and techniques to help you break the patterns around that. But it starts with that level of awareness so that you can see what that behavior is. And then the last letter is T, and that is take massive action. Now, I'm a recovering perfectionist, so I say take massive imperfect action.
Imperfect action. Yeah.
Just do it. Start where you stand and just take one tiny step in that right direction. And the bigger the step, the better it is for you. And even if all of your ducks aren't in a line, it doesn't matter. Just do it and do it anyway and fail forward, and you'll learn as you go. And once you've broken that cycle of making sure everyone's got to be, right to move forward, you'll take more, you'll be braver, and you'll take more action. So that is the shift process in a nutshell, basically, the acronym, and everything else then falls in a pillar underneath that. And we run 90-minute workshops, half-day workshops, and entire programs based around the shift process. But that's it in a nutshell.
Brilliant. Yeah, no, I can see how all of those things are extremely valuable, and how all of that would come into play. So, yeah, amazing. So now if we go back to you, and I know you started your story with your son, and there is something I really want to say here, because we get to this point on every podcast that we do. And when it comes to healing, people who are thinking about they need to go through the process, and they always say, where do I start? And I point out that it actually starts with making a decision to take responsibility. Instead of believing that everyone and everything else is responsible and it leaves you helpless and there's nothing you can do, it starts with that decision to take responsibility. And what I love is that without any prompting or any discussion at all, every podcast we do, the guest reveals where they did that, where the pivotal point, the absolute turning point was where they decided to take responsibility. I have it in my story. You've revealed it in yours. I don't think most people's will be as dramatic as after someone else's suicide. Mine was at the point of my own almost suicide, so I can relate to that. It is a bit extreme, but it comes down to taking responsibility, deciding that you are going to have a different future, and the person to make it happen is you. So thank you so much for bringing that up. You didn't even know what you were doing. I love it when that just comes up. I had to write it down to make sure I went back to it, because I'm like, yes, there it is. There it is. And I think it's so important for people listening to understand that that is your pivotal point, that everything changes there. Everything, always, always.
And it would be great if we could live a life where we don't need to get to these dramatic points
Oh,
to make a
wouldn't it?
decision. And, if you've just got a mild discontent, it would be great to make the decision from there. But either which way, it does need to be a decision. And do you know the word decision actually means cut off and kill? So,
Oh,
so
wonderful.
decision. So it comes from I think it's Latin or Greek, and it means to cut and kill. So it's cutting and killing off every other option. So,
Right.
so making that decision is cutting off and killing every other option. And interestingly enough, is once we make a decision, what happens is our psychological immune system kicks in and supports us on that.
In
Now,
that decision.
yes.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, until we make a decision, what happens while we're sitting on the fence, we cannot use that psychological immune system to kick in. It won't, it just won't. So
No,
sitting there waiting. But as soon as you make the decision, it kicks into action. And that's the thing that can really help guide you through the process. I know that was the pivotal point for me, even though I'm not understanding what a thriving life could look like, because I hadn't crafted that at that point. All I'd merely done is made the decision. And then the next step was the gratitude. And then the next step was, what does life really want, what I want it to look like? And then the next list was, oh my God, these are the things that have to change from, and list was huge of
Yeah.
what had to happen for me to get that life that I want to live. Mm.
And that's the important thing as well. We don't need to know the details. Like most of the time when we make that decision, the next thing is going to be, I don't know how, I don't know who, I don't know what. Oh, but I know. I
Mm.
just know. And then you can work the details out. So you don't need the details. So yeah, brilliant.
More vision than provision.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's all about vision at that point. It's about desire.
And
It's about knowing you want it rather than knowing how you're going to do it. But that's all good because that's the same for everyone. So, so you started off your story talking to us about your son then, which is incredibly brave, and thank you for sharing that. Um, but what about further back when you were younger? Because I know that your trauma and your dramas didn't start there.
mm. I was fortunate to have, for the first 13 years of my life, from what looked like from the outside looking in, a relatively normal life. Both of my parents were ministers, and everything looked normal. I then started dating a guy when I was only 13, and I got pregnant to him at 13.
At
And
13.
at
Yeah.
13, and so that didn't go down terribly well with two religious ministers as your parents. So that required some conversation, and then the guy, my boyfriend, became violent. Many incidences, and that carried on for quite some time. But my parents didn't know about that at all, and never did. My mother now has dementia; she still doesn't know. My father's since passed away, and they never knew that he was violent. It was all very kept quiet, and
Interesting
yeah.
that you could tell them that you were pregnant, but that you couldn't tell them that he was violent.
Yeah. So there's a lot to unpack in that. And it did take me some time to unravel that mystery as well. And so there was no escaping the fact that I was pregnant,
Ah, you couldn't hide that one.
but you can hide bruises.
Which
Yeah.
of course, yeah. Wow, how profound is that? Because that's what so many people do. They hide their bruises.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that began a pattern then moving forward in my choice of men. First boys and then men. And then my father remarried not long after my mother. So my mother and father separated. My mother had a nervous breakdown, and then my father remarried, and remarried into a family where domestic violence was just like having breakfast. So it was a thing, and it was just so commonplace. I remember, this is a strange story to tell, but that my dad's new wife, her previous husband was a known violent man, and they wanted to not provoke him, but they just wanted to put him back in his box. So they, instead of actually using violence, my dad thought he'd use intellect. So he went and got all the kids to collect keys from secondhand shops. So we all went and bought keys. Keys are very cheap from secondhand shops. And my dad had a printing business, and he made up little labels. And these labels said the guy's name and the guy's address. And then walked and drove around the neighborhood, dropping off. I don't know. I could be imagining it, but I think it was 100 keys. It was a lot of keys. And they all said, if returned to his name, there's a reward for returning these keys. And it had his address on them. So instead of like repaying him with violence, he repaid him with, 100 people knocking on his door to bring back keys that weren't his, asking for a refund or asking for a reward.
That I just find this such a bizarre story.
I
Because
know.
you're talking about someone who's a minister who, number one, you would think would have values and boundaries that would preclude domestic violence, but then this calculated, petty torture almost of someone in this way. That is not something that most of us, even if someone really hurts us, could do.
So, so you can see that underneath the thin veneer of everything being okay, there were lots
It
of
was
other things happening.
false. It was just a facade.
Hmm. So it gets more complicated. Um,
Could it?
yeah, it does. It gets so much more complicated. Um, and uh, and so that life started to unravel. Then all things were going in different directions. There were all sorts of things happening. So there was incest, there was murder, there was all sorts of things that sort of unraveled from all of that.
And
And
unraveled you, undermined you, just took away your foundation and everything safe, secure, and solid for you.
by the time I was 15, I was kicked out of home. So, and then that was a whole new level of interesting yeah. So I grew up very quickly in that space of a few years. And I didn't understand until much later on in my life the amount of damage that this compounded. And I say compounded because it was one thing after the next thing
Yeah,
after the
yeah,
next thing
of
after the
course.
next thing
It's
without any
continuous.
yes, continuous and compounded, because there was no ability to stop and evaluate and see what sort of damage it was done on the psyche. And it
Yeah.
wasn't until much later when, repeated patterns, and this is why I bang on about, finding the patterns, to see the choice of men that I'd had in my life one after the next, and the situations that I put myself into, which were very dangerous, and that I still wasn't learning those lessons. And it was literally like the universe had to slap me across the face to go, listen here, Missy, this is what you need to pay attention to. So yeah, a fascinating life, lots of lessons learnt, and yeah, and for much of it, I lived in that victim mentality where life was happening to me, not life happening for me. And
Right.
it took a series of events for me to sort of wake up and move to the other side. But on the outside, it looked like as if life was just happening sweetly. I was running $1 million business, was traveling the world. Like
All through all of that.
on the outside, it looked great. On the inside, that's not what was happening. So what was writ small here was writ large there, and it only comes from the unpacking. Yeah, it's really, and that's why I really love the focus on the patterns, because it gives you an opportunity to see this is repeated before. What's happened?
Mm.
How can you change that? What can this look? How can this look different? Where have you seen this before? And how's that worked for you? It just makes so much difference. And real advocate for asking better questions, because that's how we get into what's happening inside of us, what's happening in our subconscious and unconscious minds, to ask those better questions.
And of course, what happens as well when you're looking at the patterns, this is why people do end up in like 3, 4 abusive relationships, whether it's physical violence, emotional, whether it's financial control, repeating all of these patterns. But of course, the very important thing in the unpacking is to shift away from what gets you to move away from the victim mentality is when you look and you say, what was my role? What did I do? What did I allow? How will it change if I change? How do I need to change? And you make it all about your role rather than what everyone else is doing. Because if everyone else just carries on doing the same thing and you change you, then the impact on you is completely different.
Exactly. Exactly. Moving away from the blame, moving away from the denial, and
Yes.
taking complete responsibility for an ownership, and for everything that happens in that space, and accountability. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
It's, yeah, you're right. Ownership and accountability is the absolute game changer
Yeah.
in our lives.
and
Totally.
that's really comes from watching what the patterns are, and journaling them. Absolute advocate for journaling. I really think that gives us an opportunity. I love the power of the pen on the paper too. There's
Yes.
something energetically that happens about that, different than doing voice to text, different than typing it on a computer, and it just gets that out, and then you can reread it. So a real advocate for reviewing. Right, so reviewing your review, going back and
Yeah.
rereading it so
And
that you can then summarize the lessons that are learned.
yeah, I'm with you. Number one, I'm a big journaler myself. And sometimes I'm really shocked when I look back at some of the things that I've read. You know, they really are an eye opener. But again, yes, I very much I teach and encourage my clients to journal, and some of the really massive breakthroughs come from the journaling they've done, because sometimes they can't see it, but they'll be going through their journal with me, and I'll just stop them and go, do you hear what you just wrote? And they'll go back and maybe read it 2 or 3 times, and then you just see the veil just falls away, and it's like, oh my goodness. But if they hadn't written it down, they might not have remembered it, they might not have been able to see it in that way. I'm with you. Journaling is, it's not just gold, it's diamond. The diamonds, the gems are in the journaling when we are trying to change our lives. I absolutely agree with you. Yeah,
Absolutely. And
fantastic.
it's been a great yardstick to see the speed of recovery as well, and and also an opportunity for me to reward myself for what was hard, going to the letterbox and to get the mail. 1 week was nearly impossible, and then just going out to the letterbox and getting the mail, like just rewarding yourself for those small wins. And when you journal that and you can look back and go, oh my God, look how
What
far
I
you've
did.
come.
Yeah, yeah.
And you, because we minimize it, we make it less than it really is. And that's why we need to have that witness to our life. We need to have a bare witness to our life, and that's the journaling.
Yeah, and to celebrate the wins. We're not very good at that either. We're always focusing on what we didn't do rather than what we do. I had a client, was talking to a client the other day. She's been crippled with depression for years. And we did 2 sessions, 2 sessions. And we were talking, and I was saying, well, what have you been doing and how are you? And she said, well, she said, I got a job. She said, but it's only a part-time one, so I'm not sure how relevant that is.
That's huge.
Like, I said, what? Did you hear what you just said? How can you, but to her, she was so used to feeling useless, being told she's useless, and and feeling that nothing she does is good enough or relevant. She almost didn't want to tell me this huge step after years of depression of getting a part-time job. And
Abs-
all she can see is that maybe it's not good enough because it's not a full-time job. And this is what we do.
we have to celebrate all wins, and that
Celebrate
is part
everything.
of that success cycle, is and part of the seeing the patterns. And we're total advocates for even celebrating the tiny wins, sometimes over celebrating, but now it doesn't include alcohol, so it's okay. Usually includes chocolate.
So, well, that's amazing. So, if any of the guests listening want to get in touch with you, find out more about what you do, obviously we'll put everything in the show notes, so it will all be there. But what is the best way for them to get in touch with you? And what would your final parting words be? What are your last words for everyone?
Great question. So you can just Google me, Charlene Lynch, Sharlene Lynch. You can, through the website and all sorts of places you can get hold of me. I'll give you my electronic business card. That might be easier as well. That's got all my touch points.
Okay,
But my final words are, you've got this. The answers are within you. We're designed this way.
we are. Absolutely. We are designed for our own growth and our own healing. We absolutely are. Yeah, absolutely. Everything you need is already within you. Yeah, thank you for that. That's very, very powerful for people to understand. So, but thank you so much. Thank you for everything you've shared. Thank you for what you do. Thank you for your journey, for your experience, for your wisdom. Yeah, thank you for sharing all of that and just being that light that just lights up the path for for other people. There's no need for anyone to be stuck. There are so many people out there who have paved the way, who have done the work. We know what to do. We know how to get there. And yeah, thank you for people like you for just being prepared to come and share your stories.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been such a privilege and a pleasure.
Thanks, Charlene. We'll talk again soon.